Good evening, everybody. My name is Sharon Katzman. Thank you for joining me. I am the nutritionist at the Chambers Center for Well-Being, and thank you for joining me. Tonight, we'll be talking about intuitive eating, learning to listen to our bodies. April sent a chat saying if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box, and I'll try to get to as many as I can at the end of the presentation. So let's get started on intuitive eating. So tonight we're going to talk about what is intuitive eating. We'll discuss how dieting can affect intuitive eating. We'll discuss internal versus external cues, breaking the cycle, 10 principles to keep in mind when starting to become an intuitive eater. I'll give you some tips that can all lead to trying to help us all make peace with food. So, what is intuitive eating? Intuitive eating is actually a very simple idea, not simple to put into practice, but a very simple idea. Unlike traditional diets that restrict certain foods, intuitive eating requires you to stop looking at foods as good or bad. The goal is to listen to your body and eat what feels right. And the whole concept of intuitive eating was thought of by two nutritionists, Evelyn Tripoli and Elise Reich. They both had private practices, and they found that their patients who had extensive dieting histories, very embedded in the dieting culture, people who yo-yo dieted a lot, people who binged and restricted, they found that all these patients had something in common. And what that was is they had lost touch with the internal cues that our bodies give us in terms of eating and hunger and fullness. So they did a lot of research and a lot of studies, and they came up with this self-care eating framework, which integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. And in this framework, they came up with 10 principles to honor both our physical and mental health and things to keep in mind when we try to become intuitive eaters. So the good news is we are all born intuitive eaters. Reflect on how a newborn baby eats. The baby's hungry, the baby cries, the baby feeds, and then when the baby's had enough to eat, it either turns its head away or stops sucking on the bottle. Okay, so that, my friends, is intuitive eating, listening to what your body needs. Unfortunately, external factors take us away from eating intuitively. So the goal is to improve the relationship between food and the mind, the body, and the emotions. The goal is to start hearing these cues that the body is sending us instinctively. So, how does dieting fit into all of this? We know that people who are very immersed in the dieting culture have certain restrictions on themselves and possibly for decades. We know that in the diet culture, appearance is more important than health and well-being. It's changing. We're trying to change that, but appearance and external cue is really a driving force in the dieting culture. And people who have been practicing the rules of the dieting culture have certain shared beliefs. One is thin is equal to healthy, power, attractiveness, and success. So I think the opposite of thin, does that mean you don't have access to health, power, attractiveness, and success? Rhetorical question, but something to think about. Certain ways of eating are bad and others are good. So now we are assigning a moral judgment on foods, which then in turn becomes a moral judgment on ourselves. So I hear things like, I was bad today, or I was good today. And also a belief is that being hungry is good. Okay, you're on a restricted diet. The very nature of dieting is restrictive. So it's good if you're hungry. Unfortunately, over time, being hungry for too long makes us feel bad. And that could lead to things like weight cycling, another name for yo-yo diets, and a binge restrict cycle where you don't eat foods, you don't give yourself enough nourishment, which ends in a binge, and that becomes a cycle. We know that weight gain leads to feelings of failure and shame. And basically, we know that restrictive diets don't work. So the realities of dieting are that restrictive diets cause us to lose our ability to know when we are hungry and what our bodies need. So if you look at this circle, we start with dieting. The very nature of dieting is deprivation. So we're deprived. Being deprived leads to cravings. Cravings lead to out of control eating, and out of control eating makes us feel defeated and as if we failed, and we feel shame until the light bulb moment. Oh, here's another diet that may work, so we feel better, and then the cycle continues and continues. We end up making decisions based on external cues and not internal cues. So let's talk about that, because this balance of internal cues and external cues is really the crux of intuitive eating. So let's start with internal cues, okay? Internal cues, think of that baby. They're triggered inside the body by hormones and neurochemicals that drive our desire to eat. That's hunger. Hormones and neurochemicals also signal our body to stop eating. That would be fullness or satisfaction. External cues are those cues that come from outside the body. They may be triggered by environmental factors, seeing or smelling food, or the rules that we've learned triggered by food restrictions, food rules, these rigid rules that we have about what we should be eating and what we should not be eating. Those are external cues. And dieting really messes up this balance between our internal cues of understanding when we're hungry and when we're full. So let me give you some examples. So hunger, an internal cue for hunger might be that you're thinking about food a lot. When you eat, it's really, really delicious. So that would be an internal cue for hunger. An internal cue for fullness or satisfaction is that you're not thinking about food so much. You feel energized because you just provided your body with energy. And maybe if you continue eating, you may feel a little bit uncomfortable. So those are internal cues. External cues. An external cue for hunger would be, don't eat, I'm on a diet, I should be restricting, ignore that cue, don't eat. An external cue for fullness or satisfaction could be guilt. Why did I eat that? I was bad. So you could see how dieting interferes with this intrinsic mechanism of our bodies. So to break this cycle, we want to start listening to our internal cues. Now, I know this is difficult. If you've been living under the dieting culture for decades, learning to listen to your internal cues can be difficult, but it can be done. Remember, you and you alone are the expert of your body. No pamphlet, no diet can tell you when you're hungry. You want to start moving away from strict ingrained dieting rules and ultimately heal your relationship with food and be in touch with your body. So how do you get started? There's two things you have to do to get started. One is to reject the idea that the next diet will be successful. Okay, we have to get past the fact that just around the corner is the miracle that's going to change everything. We have to reject that idea. The next thing we have to do is reject the idea that the number on the scale solely determines your health or your self-worth. Intuitive eating is not a weight loss diet. It's not a diet. There are no meal plans, no meal replacement drinks, no restrictions, no food rules, no good or bad foods. Intuitive eating is a way of listening to your body and getting in touch with those internal cues. So I mentioned earlier that Tripoli and Reish, who coined the phrase intuitive eating, came up with 10 principles. So we're going to go over these 10 principles. Please know that there's no specific order of these. It's a process. This is not something that happens overnight, and there is no timeline to go through these principles. These are just principles to keep in mind and honor and respect. So first, we're going to talk about rejecting the diet mentality. We've discussed that. We want to get past that feeling of we need to be on a diet. We have to learn to honor and to recognize our hunger. When we're hungry, we should eat, but we have to learn to honor it and recognize what that means. And making peace with food, not assigning a moral judgment about different foods. And that would mean challenging the food police. This could be people in your life, or it could be your own internal food police judging you on how you're eating or what foods you're eating. We want to learn to discover the satisfaction factor. Know when you're satisfied. Respect your fullness. Get in touch with what that means to be full. Cope with your emotions with kindness. We want to have compassion. I hear a lot of people telling me that they're stress eaters, or when they don't want to deal with something, they self-medicate with food. So this is something to be compassionate with yourself with. Reach out to a friend, meditate, go for a massage, or talk with a professional and figure out how you can start dealing with these emotions that are causing you to stress eat. So cope with your emotions with kindness. Respect your body. Many people who have been in the dieting culture for a long time really dislike their bodies. They feel like it's not fair. They don't like their bodies. So we want to learn to respect and honor this wonderful machine that is our body. And one way of doing it is through joyful movement. And it says here in parentheses, feel the difference. It's one thing to do a workout, and I would never tell someone not to do a workout. But we have to think about enjoying movement. If you like a workout, that's great, but walking, any kind of movement, it de-stresses us. It provides cushioning for our joints. It helps to build bone. We want to start enjoying the very nature of having our bodies move. And lastly, though it doesn't have to be number 10, it's listed as number 10, honoring your health, gentle nutrition. The reason why it's listed as number 10 is that many people who are very ingrained in the dieting culture have a lot of rigid rules about what foods they should eat and what foods they shouldn't be eating. So this gentle nutrition is to kind of broaden those rigid boundaries. So some tips for you. So before eating, I recommend to pause to see how you're feeling. Breathe for 30 to 60 seconds and ask yourself, am I hungry? Or do I want to eat for another reason? Now, please know there's no right answer. This is just a question. If you're eating for another reason and you continue to eat, that is not failure. This is the beginning of awareness. So check in with yourself. See if you could feel what hungry feels like. See if you can understand that you're not eating for hunger if that's the case. Midway through the meal or snack, check in again, pause and check in again. Ask yourself, am I satisfied? What does that even mean? Just addressing the question brings it to another state of consciousness. Again, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. If you're craving sweets, experiment with sweet whole foods. Add fruits like raisins, dates, or figs to cereal, salads, and smoothies. We like sweets. Add them. We want that on our taste buds. And lastly is processed foods. I could spend a whole seminar talking on processed foods. But in terms of intuitive eating, we want to change our focus from how bad processed foods are to how these foods may interfere with your progress of becoming in tune with your body's needs. And indeed, processed foods can interfere with this process. So how does that happen? Processed foods that have added sugar, fat, and salt actually engage the pleasure centers of the brain that lead to an increase in cravings. So it's very difficult to get in touch with your internal cues when you're eating these kinds of processed foods. They sort of rewire everything that's going on. So I would start by avoiding sugary, salty, fatty, processed foods for 1 to 2 weeks to clear your mind, try to begin to distinguish between a craving and what your body needs. So intuitive eating minus the processed foods can equal a more positive relationship with food, a more positive awareness of your body's internal cues. So while you're going through this process of making peace with food, we want to make sure that you're nourished. You want to nourish your body with whole grains, nuts, seeds, lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, all of these that are rich in vitamins and minerals. And as you're increasing these foods, you're increasing your fiber intake, and that which allows you to stay full and satisfied. So while your body is being fully nourished, and you're full and satisfied, then you could start to trust your intuition. So that's the presentation. If any of you have questions, I would love to hear them. So let's see.
Have any questions right now?
Okay.
But someone did ask if you have any suggestions, or kind of mentioned if you have any suggestions for people whose schedules are a little bit tougher or like change, have like rotating shifts and stuff like that. Would you have any suggestions?
Obviously I don't have all the information, but sometimes having just a snack available in your pocket could be very helpful so that when you can eat, if you're feeling hungry, you can nibble on something. But be aware, if you're in a very stressful job, stress can cause cravings. So I always recommend, even before you go for that snack, just check in with yourself to see if you're really hungry or if this is a stress eating event. It's going to be harder to do on the job. Something like that is going to be easier to do at home when you have the time. But please know that there's a link between stress and an increase in your cravings for processed food specifically. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Oh, here somebody says, I tend to eat when I should be drinking water. Thank you for that comment. Yes, when we are dehydrated, our bodies don't know the difference between the fact that we need to hydrate or we need to eat. So it's always a good idea before you go for a snack to make sure you drink. But thank you for that comment. That's very important that we want to stay hydrated. Somebody says here, sometimes I eat because I just don't feel full. So that's an interesting comment, because do you not feel full because you're not engaged or not connected to those feelings? You don't know what fullness feels like. Check in to see how quickly you ate. It takes a full 20 minutes for our brains to understand that our bodies have been fed. So if you eat quickly, if you finish a meal in 10 minutes, you may not know that you may not feel satisfied for another 10 minutes. But all that hunger and fullness cue, these are all internal cues that we sort of have to relearn if we've been on many diets before.
Someone had also said they're waking up in the middle of the night and they're hungry.
Okay, so when you wake up in the middle of the night, it could be for several reasons. Sometimes there's a blood sugar drop. So I'd like to know what you had for dinner or what you ate before you went to sleep, because sometimes there's a rise in blood sugar and it drops. That happens a lot with people who drink a glass of wine before they go to sleep, or any alcohol. But eating in the middle of the night is not really in our best interest. So I would first consider what you ate before, if you had any alcohol, and maybe go for a glass of water before going for a snack in the middle of the night. Obviously, I'd have to get more information from you. Anybody else?
So I have someone asking about emotional eating. So I guess they're having a hard time kind of recognizing. Um,
Okay, so that's exactly what we talked about in terms of being kind and compassionate to yourself. Many of us are stress eaters or emotional eaters. We use the word self-medicate. Oh, I don't want to deal with these feelings, so I'm just going to stuff them down. So the same would apply that you take that breather for 30 to 60 seconds before you go for that snack. Whether you go for the snack or not, or for the food, isn't really what's that's not what we're talking about. It's checking in before. You may check in and still go for the food, and that's okay. But checking in before and having a consciousness that I'm eating this not because I'm hungry, because I'm really stressed out or I'm having an emotional feeling. If you find that to be the case, I would definitely reach out to a friend, do meditation, or even to speak with a trained professional who can help you deal with some of those emotions that you're having that are leading you to stress eat or to emotionally eat. I hope that was helpful. Anybody else? I just want to just reiterate that this is a process. So please know that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to be an intuitive eater. I want you just to start checking in with yourself before meals. Check in, see if you understand what hunger is, see if you can understand what fullness is. If you're in the middle of a meal, stop, check in again. Do I need to eat more? Do I feel satisfied? Again, whether you eat or not is not the point. It's getting in touch with these feelings. When somebody asks, can you eat too much fruit? Yeah, you can eat too much fruit. So, so it's a basic answer, yes. This is something that I could discuss further, but yes, you can eat too much fruit. And somebody said more resources. Yes, there is a book written by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich called Intuitive Eating. And I would recommend, if you want to learn more about intuitive eating, you could get started and you could get that book. And I think that's even going to be sent to you, right, April?
Mhm.
Yeah, so you will have that. Um, And also remember to check your email for a special promotion for joining today's seminar. And for more information or to schedule or to contact us, the information is right here on the slide. You could reach out to Chamber Center for Wellbeing at atlantichealth.org or call us at the number listed on the screen. I want to thank all of you for joining. I know this is a complicated topic and we just brushed the surface, but I hope it provided you with some informative information. Thank you.